Hello, everyone. Great to see you all. And I can see people joining. We'll be starting the webinar at about a minute or two past the hour. Please feel free to say hi in the chat box down there, introducing where you're coming in from and your name. I'll try and call out some of the names as I go along. So they're flying past me here, so bear with me. I see Andrew, Ethan, Lauren, Kavya, and just give me a moment. I'll try and keep up with the people moving quickly on me. So yes, so we'll start in the next 3 to 4 minutes. So feel free to just get your cup of coffee ready and clear those last couple of emails. There was a little bit of confusion, I know, with the start time. The invites had us out for 11, but when we published on this on LinkedIn, I got my time zones a little mixed up. So, but not to worry, for those who might think that it's coming out an hour later, I will be sending out a recording of this to everyone. So a link to the recording. So if some of your colleagues are a bit annoyed they missed it, not to worry, they'll get a second chance at it. So we'll give it another minute or so, and we'll kick things off. Probably worth pointing out that the questions box is for questions, whereas the chat box is just where we chat. And but to be honest, I don't mind where you put the your messages. We'll answer them later, but I'll cover that in the intro. Okay, whoa, they're all pouring in now. The last minute arrivals coming in before we start. So, okay, I think we shall give this a few more seconds and we'll get things going. All right. Okay, so I think we should get started. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are, and welcome to this webinar from ITAM.org and the Irish Computer Society. I'm the chapter lead of the ITEM.org chapter in Ireland, supported by Irish Computer Society. And this is one of a series of webinars we run in ITEM.org, just educating the community on many different aspects of licensing. And this topic we're covering this time around is IBM software licensing, common pitfalls and how to avoid them. Today's speaker will be Thorsten Feldman. I'll let him introduce himself later in this call. So thank you very much for coming, and moving on there. Just a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, thank you for coming. You're welcome to submit questions and comments in the chat box to your right there. Look for the one that's got questions if you've got a specific question, because I can keep a track of that one separately. And if you just want to chat among yourselves and say hi, please do so in the chat box. I'd love if you put your say hi and your name and maybe the city you're coming in from and how's the weather over there. You can see the little red box showing you where the questions go, and I will collect these questions up and we will answer them at the end, or if they're covered by Thorsten during the presentation, we'll also do that as well. If some of the questions are slightly more complex, don't worry. What we may do is park them for the webinar, but we'll follow up afterwards, particularly if they're product specific or they may be something very specific to your business and you may not want to discuss it in an open forum. Our email address is info@item.org, where you can follow up and just send us any general questions about item.org, what we're doing, or indeed the future webinars. And finally, today's presentation is being recorded. So if you don't want to be recorded, you may want to log off now. The recording will be made available by a link after this, so you're welcome to follow up with it or share it with colleagues, and I suppose make sure they cover the topic. For those of you who are members of item.org, the recording of this is actually kept in our library. It's one of the benefits of being a member. So moving on there, Thorsten. Just a quick one for you. We are relaunching our ITAM program for training, and this covers ITAM Foundation, SAM, and HAM. And you can see more details on that at item.org.com. And there is a benefit to this to everyone here today. For those of you who answer in our polls, you will be entered into a draw, and you'll receive not only the ITAM Foundation workbook, you'll also get a free shot at the foundation exam and the certification. So a nice benefit from today's attendees. Of course, if you're watching this on recording, you missed your chance. Only for the attendees. So moving on there, Thorsten. I think it's let us get started. Hand it over to you.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Piers. So hi all, I'm really pleased to see that many people being interested in IBM licensing. So it's good to know that I'm not the only one that considers this to be an important yet really challenging topic. So my name is Thorsten Feldman. I'm part of EY's software asset management team in Ireland. So I have close to 15 years experience in software licensing, out of which 10 years relate to IBM software. So that's both working on behalf of the vendor in an auditor capacity and supporting end customer organizations. So I'm going to talk about the most common pitfalls in IBM licensing. So my intention is to provide a good introduction to the topic for those with minimal experience on IBM licensing, but also provide a few interesting pieces of information and updates for those that are a little bit more seasoned than that. So the question that I ask everyone that I have IBM licensing conversations with is, how comfortable do you feel that you are correctly managing your IBM software? So for that purpose, during this presentation, we have three brief surveys. So starting off, basically, how comfortable do you feel managing IBM licenses? So Piers is just about to set up the questionnaire, a poll in the system. So if you want to have a look there. And the four options there are very comfortable, slowly getting there, not comfortable, or it might not be relevant for yourself if you're not directly managing any IBM software for an organization. So if you want to go to the poll, please.
It's just going there now. I see some subscribers going through. I'll give us about 5 seconds. Yeah, I can see the fast fingers moving, and there's a little bit of a race on between two of the options. So I'll give you another 5 seconds. And for 3. I'll give you a little longer because it keeps people are still voting, so it'd be unfair to cut you off. Great, and I'm going to close at that. So Thorsten, the results are funny actually. There's almost they're slightly moving on me here. Basically, about over a quarter to a half are slowly getting there, with almost an even split between very comfortable and not comfortable, and then a few of them that are NA. I'm not sure if they're feeling like they're geniuses or they're just not sure. So I'm just going to close
Okay.
that poll now.
No,
So yeah,
that's very interesting. Absolutely. Yeah, no, personally speaking, yes, I am obviously comfortable in IBM licensing, but this confidence is dented every single time I encounter a situation that I haven't seen before in the 10 years. So even just the other day, encountered another new IBM product, a new IBM license metric. So even if you feel quite comfortable, you will realize that there's still more to learn, and that learning never stops when it comes to IBM licensing. So thanks for taking part in this poll. So moving on. I will be providing a brief introduction on IBM and its license metrics. We will then be talking about the most pressing compliance risk, which is subcapacity licensing. Let's then discuss some less known compliance issues, and last but not least, on some recent IBM developments. So this presentation has been previously held, but there have been a good few updates since, so we have incorporated these. So let's get straight into it. You see here a very brief extract of a dozen or so of IBM license metrics. But generally speaking, the license metrics fall into two categories. The first category is licensing based on a hardware configuration of the server where the IBM software is installed. So a bit of history lesson there. So IBM licensing was nice and simple when software was licensed based on the amount of servers where the software was installed. So if you had one server, then you needed one license. However, servers got more and more powerful, and IBM customers that needed 10 servers for a specific task could now do the same task with a lot less servers. So IBM didn't want to lose any money from licensing revenue, so they introduced a new license metric, the processor metric. So now a server with 2 processors needed more licenses than one with only 1 processor. So again, technology evolved, and customers responded by using more powerful processors to reduce the amount of licenses they needed. So IBM again had to play catch up and come up with the processor value unit as a metric, which requires more licenses the more powerful the processor and uses. So we'll talk about that in a moment in more detail. So not complicated enough yet. So IBM realized that for some of its monitoring and backup software, its pricing wasn't that competitive anymore. So basically, it didn't make a difference if I wanted to monitor 1 server or 10,000. The cost per server and PVU was the same. So IBM introduced the resource value unit, which simply put means 1 processor core equals 1 resource value unit, but 10,000 processor cores are less than 10,000 resource value units. So basically, you get a volume discount, and that's baked into the license metric. So the reason why I'm mentioning this is because many people that try to get familiar with IBM licensing and try to get their head around with PVU and all of those different terms think, why is it so complicated? And I fully agree it is complicated, but there's a history behind that of why IBM arrived at these levels of complexity. The second category can be best summarized as everything else. It includes user metrics, concurrent users, simultaneous sessions, and terabyte. It can even be how many rows in a database are being used in a specific IBM product. And what you find is IBM is constantly acquiring software vendors. So Cognos, SPSS, Tivoli are just some of those acquisitions over the last few years. Initially, the products follow their own legacy license metric, but over time, they're integrated into the IBM brand family and licensing. So IBM calls this blue washing in reference to the color of their IBM logo. Again, another reason why initially there could be confusion because it's an old license metric based on the legacy system, and then it's being integrated into the IBM product family, which typically involves a change in name, etc., etc. So over the long term, obviously, the IBM's idea is to make it easier, but certainly clear that there can be confusion in the short term. Let's move to my favorite and certainly the most contentious and risky IBM licensing topic. That's PVU and subcapacity licensing. So I gave already a bit of a background on the history of licensing metrics, and one of them is PVU. So roughly speaking, half of your IBM deployments are likely to be licensed based on processor value units. The calculation is quite simple. You identify the amount of processor cores in the physical environment, and then multiply that by a value that you can identify on the IBM websites. So let's look at an example. Hopefully that makes a bit more sense then. Again, we're talking about a physical server initially, so just to try to build up the concepts and the logic there. So if you have a server with 2 processor sockets, which you can see here, and the amount of sockets is important because you need that when you identify the specific value that we're going to multiply it with later on. And for simplicity reasons, let's say you have 2 processors sitting in those 2 sockets, and each processor has 4 cores. Okay, so you see that
Thorsten, are you working okay? Hi, Thorsten. Can you it appears to be frozen. I'm not quite sure what's happening there. Just let me know, is it just on my screen or are others being also getting the frozen Thorsten screen? If you give me a quick message in the chat box to let me know, somebody. What we'll do is Thorsten's going to relog on again, and I think he probably has just some Wi-Fi issues, which I think is pretty common for all of us these days. Just to pick up on the slide that Thorsten was actually covering there, basically you've got your server, which has it's a 2 sockets, and each of those 2 sockets has 4 cores in it. So IBM are basically saying that, well, rather than paying by the server, which we used to do in the old days, you now pay by the socket. And then, oh, he's moved on. So of course, we cannot hear you at the moment. Can you come back on screen? Can't hear you. So give us a moment as we try and figure this one out. I'll get him to log back in again, and hopefully we'll get this screen back for everybody. Giving it a moment. So hopefully he'll be joining us. You're getting to see my sitting room right now as Thorsten gets the presentation back up to work again. So while we wait, were there any particular just general IBM licensing questions you wanted to ask? This is about to turn into I guess, an AMA for IBM licensing. So please start posing some questions and I'll do my best to answer them for you. So you have the question box, and I suggest, have you got a particular topic you'd like? Hang on, we see questions coming through. One I get to see coming through here is, where does the PVU value come from? Yes, in the example that Thorsten gave there a moment ago, that PVU number is actually comes from IBM. They have a table. It's on the website. So if you type in IBM PVU, you'll actually find in Google a document or a page that's maintained. And essentially, for every processor type, it will have a PVU value ranging from to be around 50 up to 120. 120 being the default. So in other words, if you don't get the numbers right, you have to pay the top one. In that one there was 70, which is typical for an Intel box. So to run the example, number of sockets, multiply by number of cores, multiply by the PVU value gives you the PVU for that particular license. And that's how many you need to buy. So, and I see I'll let Torsten's working on sorting out the comms issue in the background. Next up, I'll just see if we've got anything else popping up in the chat boxes. Please pose your questions here. So next one up is, will you be covering IASP? Yes, we will. We'll touch on that later on, Thorsten's presentation. IASP is essentially the IBM approved SAM partner program, and it is essentially being offered by a limited number of suppliers right now. And really what it offers you is you get to sidestep the audit requirements so long as you have one of the approved vendors providing this SAM service. It also has the added benefit of allowing you to use other tools as well as ILMT, which again, Thorsten will cover later on in the presentation. Next one, let's see what else we got coming through. Any other questions, anybody? Please pose them and help me make this one interesting for you. Let me just scroll this box here. Hang on now, I'll get this to getting the job. So, frozen. I'm getting lots of frozen. Okay, there's a couple of these now are a little bit tricky for me. And it's PVU based metric, the allocated product. Okay, due to application agent. Will we be covering bundling? Not specifically, but what I can do is just briefly cover bundling right now for you while we wait. Bundling refers to essentially where IBM include a number of free products when you buy a primary product from them. So for example, you might buy the e-commerce solution and it will then be what it will be bundled in with it will be essentially products such as the database, middleware, and a variety of other products. Why bundling is important essentially is that when you buy that primary product, you have in certain conditions a number of other free products that you do not have to license if they're used a certain way. So how do you find out what products are free? Essentially, you need to go to the IBM website and you need to look up, first of all, you look up the product, but most importantly, you must also look up the version of the product. Why this is important here is that each version of the product essentially in the IBM world changes. The entitlement conditions change, the restrictions change around it. So that's why you need to check when you're searching for both the product for a product for bundling rules. You need to look up not only the product but the version on the website. Thorsten, are you back to us?
Yes, I am back. So apologies. That's the joy of working from home. So thanks for staying
No
with me.
problem. I was about to be stretched on my IBM licensing knowledge there. So if you could bring your presentation back up and we'll pick it up from where you left off.
Sure, just give me 1 second. So do you want to assign presenter rights to me, PS? I think I don't have them at the moment.
Of course. Just a moment till I find out. I'll change the presenter to you, and you should have it back now. So to finish off that question on the bundling, we won't cover it in detail here today, but Thorsten, we can cover it in the Q&A at the end. So if if you go back 2 slides, Thorsten, and that's where it seemed to disappear for myself. And
So shall I stop here?
And it was just here you had finished off and you're about to transition. So thank you for everyone's patience on this one. And you've all stayed, which is great. Thank you. It must be interesting.
Thanks.
So finish
Thanks
it off,
again.
Thorsten. Thank you.
Sure, good. So that example that we just spoke about was for the physical environment in terms of calculating the PVU requirement. So 2 by 4, which is basically the amount of processor cores in that server. So 4 cores per processor, and then the PVU value of 70 that can be identified on the IBM website, resulting in a license requirement of 560 PVU. Moving on. So that was for physical environment. Now it gets interesting. We're going to talk about IBM licensing in a virtual environment. For that, we need to introduce 2 new terms, full capacity and subcapacity licensing. The graphic on the left is showing a physical host with 8 processor cores and 2 virtual machines with 4 processor cores each assigned to them. The first virtual machine has the IBM product WebSphere installed, and the other one has no IBM software. We remember the definition that each processor core in the physical hardware environment is to be licensed. That is the standard concept of IBM licensing and is called full capacity licensing. So even though only 4 out of the 8 virtual cores are using the IBM product, all 8 cores are licensable under full capacity terms. Subcapacity terms mean that you only license the virtual machine with the IBM product installed, so only 4 out of the 8 processor cores. The difference between the 2 scenarios is often even bigger. Imagine a 2-core virtual machine sitting on a 16-core host. So subcapacity licensing is a lot more cost effective, but there's a catch. IBM licensing terms require you to install a tool called the IBM License Metric Tool, ILMT, to monitor the changes in the environment. So why is that the case? As you all know, virtualization technologies provide a great deal of flexibility. It is easy to set up a new virtual machine, and it's easy to increase or decrease the amount of virtual cores that are allocated to the virtual machine. So for example, the client that I'm working with at the moment is setting up new virtual machines in the morning and killing them by the end of the day. So for example, also think about a retail company that is increasing the core allocation ahead of Black Friday to support the online shop and then reduce it again afterwards. Whatever the highest value is, even if only for a few days, that is what matters from an IBM licensing perspective. The IBM License Metric tool is there to establish the high watermark over a period of time. Without this tool, any point in time measurement might only pick up a lower consumption. So what is the IBM License Metric tool? It is a free of charge tool provided by IBM. It consists of a managing server and agents that are deployed in the environment and that are reported back to the managing server. So at a minimum, it should be installed in all virtual servers with IBM software, but it makes sense to deploy it across the environment. Apart from the initial deployment of ILMT, the tool is to be configured and kept up to date. So it does require a decent amount of effort to be kept up to date. So we saw the IBM license requirement that to benefit from subcapacity licensing, ILMT is to be installed. So if there's no ILMT installed, then all your software is licensed based on the full capacity terms. And this is really crucial. I still come across clients that have IBM software in a virtual environment and don't have ILMT installed. If you're one of those clients, then get that sorted as soon as possible. There's really a substantial cost implication. Most customers, however, that I come across have invested some effort into ILMT, but are often not consistent and don't keep the tool current. The slide shows an example of a partially deployed ILMT. You can see here a physical host with 32 processor cores and 6 virtual machines with a specific IBM product. 5 of the 6 virtual machines have an ILMT agent and are therefore subcapacity eligible. The license requirement for those 5 virtual machines is based on the 1 or 2 licensable cores that are listed here. However, the virtual machine VM4 does not have an ILMT agent. VM4 doesn't have an ILMT agent because IBM wouldn't know what the high watermark of the core allocation over time is. The assumption is that it could consume the entire remaining hardware capacity. So basically the 25 cores. So basically the 32 cores that we are across the whole environment are used up for the virtual machines with an ILMT agent, and the remainder is then the 25 that could in theory be consumed by VM4, and therefore from an IBM licensing perspective is considered to be licensable. So this is not an uncommon scenario. So we're basically getting it slightly wrong. It's just as costly as having no ILMT at all. So what can you do about it? What we typically suggest to a client is to prepare an ILMT health check. It consists of two parts. The first is the completeness assessment. So you get an extract of all the devices that are covered by ILMT, and you prepare an asset list of all the devices in your environment. So from sources such as Active Directory, antivirus, your CMDB, or your SAM tool. So you reconcile both lists and identify the devices that still need to get an ILMT agent. So also don't forget to ensure that ILMT agents should become part of the standard software image of any new server that is commissioned. So basically, there's no extra effort getting agents on any new devices, but it's basically built into the standard build.
Thorsten, just one of the questions that came in there. Does ILMT send any information to IBM?
No, it's not. So it stays within your environment. So obviously keep in mind, the reason why you have this tool is that IBM could request those reports in case of an audit. Obviously then you have to submit it to either IBM or the auditor. But on its own, it's not submitting anything to IBM. So it stays within your environment. You have full control of the data. But as I said, you may have to provide extracts from the tool as part of an IBM audit.
Thank you.
The second part is an accuracy or health assessment. So review any ILMT reporting issues and mitigate these. So that can be misreporting in terms of virtual information, or that the agents are not able to report back to the managing servers. These are all issues that needs to be looked at. So verify that ILMT is reporting correctly by comparing it against the secondary deployment data. So and talk to the product owners. Quite recently, we have a good few examples where basically ILMT is identifying software tags, but those software tags of specific products are installed even if the product is just copied onto the device but not actually installed, or where the various features are being included in the software tags even though it's actually not installed. So it does require some additional validation there. Or ILMT might not report the product based on the license metric that you have purchased. So you might have purchased a product under the PVU metric, but the ILMT is considering it to be authorized user. So again, that's something you need to validate and correct accordingly. So you can also apply exclusions where software is not licensable. So for example, due to any code standby configuration, etc. So coming on to another brief survey. So what was your experience at your organization's last IBM audit? So Piers is just setting up the poll there. The options are, have not been audited before, so therefore no experience. It's been painful, but no major issues were found. Major compliance issues were uncovered, and hopefully you've learned from that or have decided how you want to move forward, or it all went smooth, or anything else. Any other options, and please share them as part of the chat if you want.
I can just see them coming through now quite fast. My goodness, quite a number of you have not been audited. Aren't you doing well? Or maybe they haven't told you about it yet. Yes, catching back up now. I think what it might be is some of those who have been audited are still sore and don't want to talk about it. So I'll give it another 5 or 10 seconds and hit the close on that one in a moment. And I'll go to hit the close. So I'm going to do a share on the screen now. So can you see that, Thorsten?
I can't, but I hope all the users can see. So just have a
But
separate
I
view.
shall read them out then for you.
Sure, go ahead.
So the 50% have not been audited before,
Mhm.
13% painful but no major issues found, 10% major compliance was uncovered, and 3% went smoothly, with 23 in the other category. I'm wondering if those are the people doing the audit, but
That
sorry.
could well be the case.
So
Yeah, like
yes,
and what
go
we
ahead.
realize, and especially in mature markets, most organizations tend to be reviewed every 3 to 5 years, as I mentioned earlier. So it's not uncommon that most organizations would have been audited already 2, 3, 4 times. And the interesting bit is every single time issues are found. So it's
Hmm.
basically it's important to learn from those audits, implement changes as required. So the next audit is never far away, unfortunately. So if you haven't been
Thorsten,
audited, go
is there
ahead,
any
yeah.
particular? It just popped into my head there. What do you find are very often common triggers, apart from every 3 to 5 years, or anything in particular that people should be careful of when it comes to audits?
Yeah, sure. So basically, IBM has views of your purchase history. So if there's any inconsistency there, so basically, if they know that you're expanding your organization, but your license purchase don't keep up, just general news in terms of mergers and acquisitions can be it. Even what's not uncommon is that the technical teams that you work with on a day-to-day basis, they're obviously also sharing information with the compliance team. So be careful of when you talk to IBM. It doesn't matter if it's a technical resource that tends to be really helpful, but they might still share information with the compliance team. Doesn't mean don't reach out to them, but obviously tailor the kind of information that you share with them. So that would be my
Okay,
advice on that.
thank you, Thorsten.
Great. So there are a few further compliance issues that I would like to talk about. So which are managed environments. So there are some IBM products that are licensable based on the environment they are managing rather than the environment where the software is installed. So for example, Tivoli Workload Scheduler for application can be used to manage your SAP environment. So you only require an agent to be installed on very specific parts of your SAP environment, but the whole environment is managed and therefore would be licensable. Development and test. Many people believe development and test instances are not licensable. However, that's not correct. You do need to license those instances. So therefore, keep track of those as well. There can be a small amount of exceptions for some products, but you would have to check the IBM license information document to validate if that applies to your specific product. But the default situation is development and test instances are licensable. Duplicate instances during migration. So migrations from one environment to another often require you to run both environments in parallel. So to avoid that both environments need to be licensed, seek approval from IBM that you can double the requirements during that migration. So typically what IBM tends to accept is a period of 90 days within which you can run both in parallel. If you get such an approval to use it for 90 days, then make sure that indeed after those 90 days you have completed the migration or seek a further extension from IBM. Product bundling. So one IBM product can be bundled with another. DB2 might support another product. However, be aware that those rules can change from version to version. So you might find in one version, DB2 or another product is included as a bundled product, but for the next version, it's not. So when you upgrade your versions, do check that the license information document is still consistent and that you're still permitted to use that supporting product.
This was a question that came up earlier, and I think you've
Mhm.
probably answered it a bit more succinctly than me. And a very
Okay,
important
good.
area. I think it's also a fantastic area to manage costs. I think if you can get your bundling right, you can really bring down the default license position. I think you'd agree, Thorsten.
Yeah, indeed. Like when you basically try to identify your IBM position and use tools like ILMT, or you have any other methods of identifying what's out there, then you will have a whole range of IBM deployments that don't seem to have a product that you purchased. So it tends to be quite a bit of an effort to first identify which products might not be licensable at all, but then also those that are actually supporting another product. So it's good to pay attention to that. And as you say, rather than just going off and purchase licenses for those products that are identified, as I said, typical ones are DB2, different WebSphere products, etc. I confirm if they might be supporting another product and use license information documents from IBM to get that confirmed that indeed a bundling relationship exists. Another topic is access rights. So typically it matters what access rights you're giving to a user, regardless if that access right is actually being used or not. So for example, organization I worked with many years ago, they have given administrative rights for a specific IBM product to every user in the company. So they enabled that through an Active Directory group, but actually only a very small number of individuals actually needed to use that right. But what matters is the ability to access a product. So just be careful how you give access to people. Some products in IBM, in the IBM world, are a little bit more difficult to control the access, but just review that in detail of who you give access to the product and do they need that access. Cold, warm, and hot standby. So cold and warm standby are not licensable, but IBM has a specific definition of what it considers to be cold and warm standby, and there's a term called doing work. So there's an IBM definition out there. So check if your specific configuration that you consider to be cold and warm standby is in line with the IBM definition. Then enabled features. So there's a range of IBM products, for example, DB2, where you can enable features, and often you do that by mistake, for example, when installing the software. So it's easy to be non-compliant for a product that you haven't even purchased because you might have accidentally switched on a feature for that product that requires extra licenses. So worth paying close attention to that. Yeah, go ahead, Piers.
No, I was just thinking of the because so often when it comes to managing the licenses, we're completely focused on the PVU and where it's deployed, but you're actually saying there's the extra layer of complexity. I'm thinking probably Cognos is a very common example I come across
That's indeed the
myself,
product I had in mind. Yes, yes, fully agreed.
where you have it deployed, but then you realize there's actually, as you say, depending on the access you've granted at Access Directory level or whatever you're using to manage authentication, you might have given them admin use, you may have given them designer, you may give them explorer, you may or just viewer, and as you say, they have a dramatic difference in the price, the license cost, and the licensing rules are depending on what you've actually granted within the product. So yeah, it's just one, I guess I was bringing to everyone's attention again. Thank you.
Yeah, no, Cognos is a perfect example. And what makes it difficult, depending on the there's so many different Cognos products out there, but for some of them, the issue is that you set up user groups, and in those user groups, you have other user groups. So it's easy to lose track if you add a user to one user group, how it translates into the access. So it is quite complex for some of those products. So that's why those products, as you said, Cognos is a good example, require specific attention.
I'm just thinking actually that what I found is a very useful technique I've seen some of the administrators doing, and that is to be very careful to just create a specific group for each level of user type. So if you've got the explorers or the admins, they have a specific group, and you actually call it that: Cognos admins, Cognos designers, or whatever, and being very strict about maintaining that. It can be helpful, and it makes it when it comes to
It can.
checking
It's
the
like just what some administrators rely on is then simply those names of those user groups. So it requires the additional validation of what access rights that specific user group has been given access to. So
a good
it
warning.
doesn't always match. So there's also some standard user groups in some of those products. So you might just rely on those, but you might have given them different access than it says on the tin. So as I said, worth looking into that. So that keeps IBM licensing both complex and interesting, the variety of different potential issues. So let's talk about some recent IBM developments. So we had 3 major restructuring announcements from IBM in the recent years. The aim of all three is to for IBM to focus more on hybrid cloud and artificial intelligence products and services, and at the same time to move away from some of the legacy business. The first was the acquisition of Red Hat in 2019, with the aim to become the leading provider of hybrid cloud services. So from a client and licensing perspective, there isn't much change. Red Hat is largely independent and retains its own license rules and compliance team, but is worth keeping in mind that part of the IBM family. The second of the two changes equally happened in 2019, where IBM sold off a range of IBM products to HCL. So including the products that most people would mostly associate with IBM. So that's Domino and Lotus Notes. When it comes to licensing of these products sold to HCL, the licensing terms and documentation remains rather vague, to be honest. So in many cases, HCL have just copy and pasted the licensing terms from IBM and just swapped IBM terms with HCL terms. So, but HCL has failed to properly articulate its licensing terms around virtualization. In result, those trying to manage HCL licenses have to fill any gaps in the HCL terms with those that existed prior to the acquisition from IBM.
So Thorsten, are you basically saying that you must assume it's whatever IBM licensed it before until they can prove otherwise? Would that be it? Or
It's
we just be
obviously
very, very careful?
It's not a foolproof. So obviously it's not foolproof. So obviously if HCL has failed to provide any specific guidance there, then it's obviously quite a bit in the dark there, right? So the best you can do until you get some decent information from HCL is work with the definitions that existed before. But as I said, it's quite disappointing reading the licensing terms from HCL and make it quite tough to manage those licenses. So for IBM, everything is documented. It's complicated, but it's documented. For HCL, unfortunately, it's not the case. So unfortunately, you will have a certain risk that you have to accept there.
I suppose I'd probably add on to that, if you are buying new products from HCL, make no assumptions. Basically ask them as part of the purchase to be very explicit and to provide you with the documents. Because I think historically we've relied, because IBM is so good at posting the information on the license information websites, we've kind of assumed that everyone else in the licensing world does that as well, and it's not the case. So I suppose to take Thorsten, your point there, if you're buying products, upgrades in particular, extensions from HCL, be very clear on the licensing, I guess, what your entitlement is, and get the documentation. You cannot rely on the website for the moment.
Yeah, fully agreed.
Would that be right?
Yes, absolutely. Good point. So the third is the spin-off of IBM's infrastructure business into a new company, and therefore they refer it as NewCo. So and the remaining business called RemainCo is going to stay and will focus on hybrid cloud and artificial intelligence. This spin-off is planned to be completed by the end of the year. So we still have to see in terms of any specific changes for IBM customers. So stay tuned on that. But for the moment, obviously, there's going to be changes of those customers that have the infrastructure managed by IBM. So just about 2 years ago, IBM has introduced an alternative to the standard IBM audits that typically take place every 3 to 5 years, as explained earlier. So that program is called the IBM Authorized SAM Provider Program, IASP, and may be of interest for some clients. So as we have discussed, the key compliance risk in IBM licensing is using IBM software in a virtual environment, and that's called subcapacity licensing, and the associated requirement to use the IBM subcapacity tool, such as ILMT, BigFix, or Flexera. So how does that program work? So the client would sign up an agreement with IBM, which defines the specific requirements of the program. And the client would engage an ISP provider, so for example, EY, that would then assist the client in meeting its requirements as part of the program. So there are two phases. The first phase, called the baseline phase, the ISP partner is conducting an ILMT health check to ensure that the tool is complete and that there are no reporting issues. So any issues that are identified are then being mitigated, and only then ILMT outputs are being used to produce an additional baseline. And this is where one of the key differences to an audit. So, and this is really important to highlight. Any compliance issues as a result of not correctly using RLMT are first addressed and then being reported on. So rather than in an audit scenario, like we looked at this example earlier where one virtual machine did not have an RLMT agent, any of those issues, if they identified an audit scenario, you would be exposed to full capacity licensing. In an ISP, that issue would first be resolved so that you can then benefit from subcapacity licensing and be reported based on that. So basically, the first phase is to resolve any issues. Then a report is being prepared. That report is shared with the client, and only the client has full ownership of that report and would then be issuing it to IBM.
Thorsten, a question that's come in here is this information shared with IBM? And I think you've just answered that by saying the initial report is between the ISP and the client, and they basically correct any problems between themselves first.
So basically, so what the client has to share with IBM is the report that is produced, an effective license position, so to speak. So, and that's only the point in time when the client would be sharing it with IBM. But as I said, the ISP provider would be working with you to resolve those issues, produce a report, share that report with you as the client, and you have then can use that report to issue basically your self-declaration, if you want, to IBM. So you have full control of the data flow from that goes to IBM because it's you that would be submitting those reports.
Understood. Thank you. Hope that answers the question for them.
Good. Yeah, perfect. Otherwise, just post another question. We can come back to that. So that's the initial baseline. So afterwards goes into a reporting phase, which consists of both quarterly for PVU products, so for those products that are licensed based on the hardware configuration and can be maintained through RLMT. And then on an annual basis, it's for all products, so both for PVU and non-PVU. So what are the benefits for the clients? So the clients are not being audited by IBM while they're part of this program. So basically the agreement that they would sign at the outset would alter the standard audit right. And yes, of course, there's a decent amount of work that has to go into that. But to be honest, this work would needs to happen anyway to manage your IBM licenses. So you're basically just focusing your efforts for this program rather than managing licenses on a day-to-day basis anyway. The other big benefit is all licensing accounts are at a subcapacity virtualized level. So, and again, the idea is initially, any compliance issues are being resolved when it comes to subcapacity licensing. So the lack of RLMT on specific machines, any reporting issues, something that happens quite often that you might have an operating system or virtualization technology that is no longer eligible. So those issues are identified as the first step. Then they can be mitigated together with the ISP provider. And then once you're fully compliant with the subcapacity terms, then the reporting will take place.
Thorsten, someone just pointed out that we may have missed Flexera from the list of tools there. So
it's
yes,
indeed and I'll come to that in a moment actually. So it's the three tools: RLMT, BigFix, and Flexera. That's correct. And there's an extension there that I'm going to talk about in a moment. But basically, this is a different situation when it comes to Flexera versus other tools. So just bear with me on the moment. So yeah, another two benefits is basically any compliance issues are resolved at the standard discount rate, and there would be no back maintenance. So as part of an audit, you would typically have to pay back maintenance up to 2 years. That's not the case as part of an ISP if that report that you issue to IBM shows any compliance issues. And then, to be honest, it's the actively managing your environment where you really benefit. So basically, because you're closely reporting on your IBM environment, you're getting a lot of insight from your ISP provider. There's a lot of opportunity where you can optimize your IBM estate and the software spend. So so coming basically to the point of the different tooling. So just before the end of last year, IBM announced a further update to the program. So I discussed before, the IBM authorized subcapacity tools are ILMT, BigFix, and Flexera. So IBM has been frequently being asked by why other software asset management tools are not included as part of that. So why is it just Flexera? So an IBM's response to that is that it had spent a good amount of effort to validate that Flexera meets the requirements as an alternative to ILMT. And to be frank, we still see a good few issues with Flexera. But basically, IBM recognizes that there are other good SAM tools as well, such as Aspera, Snow, and ServiceNow. But it doesn't have that same level of confidence as it does with ILMT, BigFix, or Flexera. And therefore, it basically says, as part of the ISP program, a client can use one of those three tools. So again, that's Aspera, Snow, and ServiceNow, if being used as part of the ISP program, and if the ISP partner is validating the accuracy of the tool and is supplementing any missing information, especially when it comes to virtualization through other data sources. So basically, IBM feels that if there's close support from an ISP provider, then it could be indeed be used in this ISP context.
So Thorsten, what you're saying here is essentially the ISP will have to ensure that these tools are correct, or that ultimately the report being presented to IBM is correct.
Correct, yes. And I just see there's a question, Snow doesn't have the ability to manage PVU and RVU. So there's indeed, that's what I mentioned. There's a functionality gap, right? And that's where alternative data sources have to be used. So for example, that could involve VMware data or other virtualization data that could be used instead. So that's the idea behind that.
So this is where the ISP really has to earn their money, because they have to do all of this work.
It is, and obviously, yes, it is more effort than having to use additional data sources such as VMware extracts, etc. But for some clients, I think it does make sense because it means they don't have to maintain a separate tool. So they don't have to maintain the standard software asset management tool, such as I said, Snow, Aspera, or ServiceNow, and on top of that, ILMT. So they might find it's easier to just stick with their main tool, make sure that this main tool is fully utilized also and enabled in terms of completeness and accuracy, and then accept that some of the information has to be supplemented. So it doesn't make sense to every client, depends on the environment, depends on the virtualization technologies being used, but it can be an option for certain clients.
Okay.
So what it is that you should take away from this presentation. So using IBM software in a virtualized environment has substantial licensing implications. So ensure that you have ILMT or any other subcapacity tool installed, and ensure that your ILMT is complete and accurate. And ensure that you understand all applicable IBM licensing terms. So one final survey. So we still have a few minutes, so let's do that. And the question is, what do you need most to better manage IBM software licenses? Do you feel you need more training, better tools, skilled resources, clear licensing terms, or is it something else?
I'll launch it.
Thank you.
I'll give it a couple of more moments here, because I'm sure there'll be a few questions they'd like you to answer, Thorsten, before we finish.
Sure.
Right now, the clear licensing terms is winning. We'll give it another 5 more seconds. That's coming. It's been coming back, and we will about to close it. 3, 2, 1, and close and share. So just for Thorsten, for your benefit, the top one is actually clear licensing terms at 36, followed by more training at 28%. Then we've got skilled resources, interesting, and better tools and other. I guess for the other, you can probably pop that in the chat box and let me know what the others are. So yeah.
That's interesting. Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, no, so in terms of licensing terms, I fully agree. So it is not easy to go through those, understand, and make sure that all the different scenarios are covered. So it is even for those that do that for many years, always a bit of a struggle. And the common issue that you have as well, so licensing terms are not often designed by those that have to manage licenses or audit licenses. It's often done by the product teams, right? So they think about what makes most sense from selling the product rather than being able to validate how it's deployed. So that's often the context, but fully agreed. This can be a complicated topic. So thanks for being part of this survey. So I think we have a few more minutes for any questions.
We have a
Do you have
couple of
anything
minutes for
else?
questions. Yes. Well, I'm just going to. I've been answering them as I tried through in the chat boxes, but I'll if you just give me a moment, I'll bring up this. So the first one I got here is, well, I think we've covered bundling. I think there's probably a whole webinar we can do on bundling again anyway. There was a broad question. There was a couple of questions just around Cloud Pak. Can you just comment at a high level on that for us? What is Cloud Pak?
So Cloudback, so I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with the WebSphere family licenses. So basically, let me explain using the WebSphere family as an example. So basically, rather than buying licenses for a specific product, you get instead licenses for a group of products, and that allows you then to pick any of those products within that group of family. That's the general idea about Cloud Paks. There's different groups of products, so there's Cloud Paks for applications and et cetera, et cetera. It also, IBM has released documentation in terms of how to use that product in a containerized environment. So it's all quite detailed. I don't think we have too much time to get into the very specifics, but that's the core concept.
Okay. Had a licensing question now. It's maybe a little bit subtle here, given the conditions. Can you license or buy licenses between the US and EMEA? I think this is probably, can you take advantage of price differences possibly, or how does the license differ between the two regions?
There can be price differences, but typically you purchase license for a specific entity, and those you have to use them in that entity. So it obviously it's a question in practical terms, how will IBM able to identify that? In an audit scenario, it's likely that this could come up. So you have to basically purchase a license for the entity that you're using them for in that geography.
Okay, and I think I think we've covered it already. There was talking about there's lots of tools, Snow, Flexera, ServiceNow, and they have gaps in their functionality. How is that covered? And I think you've already covered that by saying they'll have to use other sources, and it's up to the ISP to confirm that that is correct. I think was your
Correct,
answer,
yeah.
was it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
So I hope that answers those question there. I'm just looking here now. Can customers choose to be part? Can customers choose to be part of the ISP program, or do they have to be invited? And is there criteria to get invited?
So it's originally it was based on nomination and acceptance from IBMs, and obviously IBM still needs to accept each specific client. Our general experience is most clients should be eligible. It could well be, for example, that IBM had you already on their audit list, or for any other reasons didn't intend to offer this option to you. But I'd say 9 out of 10 clients should be eligible and should be able to have that conversation with IBM.
As you say, though, if they're not in good standing or they're in the middle of an audit, it's potentially not a get out of jail card.
Yeah, like even as I said, like IBM is doing planning in terms of when it intends to audit a specific client. If you are due to get a notification letter, or if you have already a notification letter for an audit, then the answer is likely to be no.
A slightly technical question, but can ILMT measure consumption for RVU and UVU?
So for RVU means can mean different things. So I gave the example earlier about backup solutions. So that's the Tivoli products, or the Spectrum products as they're called nowadays. So for those it can, yes, but RVU can also mean can be based on other license metrics. So if it's based basically on the hardware configuration, it can do that, yes.
So basically, it comes down to what is the resource being managed and can it be measured
Correct. Yeah.
by LMT? I get you. Okay. Do we have product license terms for IBM like you have for Microsoft?
Not
Hopefully,
quite sure I understand the question.
I'm not sure myself. If the person who asked that question could add a little bit more detail, that would be helpful. I think I see one here. How is subcapacity calculated in a cluster? I think your example covered that, did it, Thorsten?
Yeah,
Or
so for
can you comment on it further?
subcapacity, yeah, so like for subcapacity, it's still just the virtual machine that you have. So that needs
Ah,
to be licensed. It
so
gets more
I think yeah, the question here is, so it's down to the physical device that you're licensing the subcapacity on. Is that it? So the cluster doesn't. It's not that you can have, you know, like Oracle, where it says if you're anywhere that the machine can move, you have to pay the license for it.
Well, like we need to distinguish there between subcapacity and full capacity. On the subcapacity terms, obviously you need to establish the PVU rating, for example, right? And the PVU rating, it depends on the hardware. So if you have a cluster, most cases you have a cluster with equal sized and configured servers, physical servers, in which case it doesn't matter on which machine the virtual machine sits. If there's different, then obviously if currently the machine sits on host A and host A has a different hardware configuration, different PVU rating, then that's what's required in terms of licensing. But again, it's always just for the virtual machine. When it gets tricky is the full capacity licensing. So the scenario that we had earlier, where you might have missed an ILMT agent for a specific virtual machine. What IBM would then say, let's say you have a cluster with 5 hosts and 5 virtual machines. All of them are currently sitting on the first host, but you do not have any ILMT on any of those instances. IBM says, in a worst case scenario, each of those virtual machines could sit on their own physical host. So they could spread out first virtual machine on the first host, the second on the second host, etc. And that basically the full capacity term requirements for that scenario would be that all 5 physical hosts would be licensable. Depending on the
Okay.
specific virtual, it gets a bit more complicated, depends on the specific virtualization settings, etc., etc. But that's the worst case. But I think the question was initially focused on the subcapacity, and for the subcapacity, it would only matter if there's different PVU ratings, basically for the specific physical host.
Okay, now we've passed the top of the hour, and I'm guessing that people may have either lunches to go to or any other questions. So what I would ask is I will go through the remaining questions in the boxes here. If you wish to stay on, and I'll answer them for you, or we'll answer them off after the session. But I'd like to thank you for attending. As I said, the webinar will be made available after this. I will send out a link you can share with your friends. And if you have any other questions, keep answering them there, and I will answer them after the webinar is tailing off here. And hope to see you at other events in the future. Thank you, Thorsten, for a very informative webinar, and thank you all for attending. I shall leave it there for today. So I'm going to continue on the session here. The rest of you are welcome to go and have your lunches. Okay, so thank you very much.